Hey everybody, Scott from ActiveShock. Hey, I'm back at my undisclosed location with my 1995 Camaro. Hey, in today's video we're going to go over the Berserker ASM Tuning tool. Hey, I'm pretty excited about this video because there's some pretty neat stuff in this tool. So let's not spend a lot of time talking about it, let's get right at it.
This video isn't designed to turn you into a vehicle dynamicist. If you're not familiar with shock tuning, there are plenty of resources out there to help you get a handle on it. Here are some of my favorites. Next, you're going to want to grab your laptop with the software loaded on it. Remember, nobody can operate a vehicle safely while also operating a laptop. So please, if you're going to do tuning, go out and find a partner to help you out. So I've connected my USB cable to the master, connected it to my computer, and I've opened up the software. I've also keyed on the ignition in the vehicle, and I noticed I had a green light for my status LED on the dashboard. And when I open up the system monitor tab, I've got green lights for all my components, so my system is working properly, and I've got a good basis to begin tuning. Before I get started on tuning, let's just take a little time to talk about the vehicle setup tab. It's important that this information be accurate and that you took care during your installation to calibrate all your sensors properly. The computer is going to make decisions on those inputs from the sensors, and it's going to be important that what it sees for information actually corresponds to what the vehicle is doing. We wouldn't want, for instance, the computer to think that the front wheel was in full compression when in fact it was sitting at ride height. Computer is going to make different decisions based on that data. So if you check the data here and you know that it's correct, you can begin to move on and start your tuning. So let's go to the tuning tab and sort of go over the layout of the tuning tabs and how all the buttons function. So I've opened up my tuning tab, and let's take a minute to get familiar with the features and the buttons in this tab. First, in the upper left hand corner is the ride mode display, and that shows me what the dashboard switch is currently positioned at. So right now I'm in tune 1 with my ride switch in the car. I can move it to tune 2 and to tune 3, and that's reflected in the display. And this is useful for the person sitting behind the computer so they can understand what mode the car is in, so that if we're testing changes or tuning in tune 1, we can make sure the car is in tune 1 so that we can actually feel those changes. The switch selectables are buttons that I pick for the tune I want to work on. So I have tune 1, 2, and 3, and I can pick from those. The other button here is a switch disabled mode, and this allows me to do a single mode tune. So if I press this button, it now tells me that my ride mode switch is disabled. And I would use this function to create a custom tune for a specific racetrack or autocross venue or something of that nature. In this section are the buttons that we use to save or test changes. And there are two different types of memory in our master controller. There's temporary memory and permanent memory. Anytime we're using the test button, we are writing values to the temporary memory. When we use the save function, we're actually writing to the permanent memory in the master. We also have another button over here that allows us to return our vehicle to factory settings. So should we be making changes and we get way off on a limb and it's not working properly, we can go back and hit the factory settings to restore that vehicle back to the original setup. We also have two buttons here that allow us to make changes and apply those changes to only the open tabs or apply them to all tabs. So the tabs on the bottom here we're going to be making changes in, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. But we can either make changes to the open tab that we're in, or we can make changes that apply to all tabs. The next section we'll talk about is the load and save to the computer section. And in here we have the ability to load or save setup. So I could take the setup I have in my car right now, I can hit the save button, and that's going to actually create a file on my PC that corresponds with all the values that I've changed in all of my tabs. And I can save that and name that. I could name that today's date just to make it simple for us right now. And I now have saved the setup that's in the car. And I can save multiple setups and load multiple setups as I need. So I can go back, for instance, and load a setup. I have a couple of setups in here from a few days ago. And I can actually load those setups. Now that allows me to create as many tunes as I want, save them on my PC, call them up, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the advantages of doing that later in our video. Across the bottom we have 5 tabs, each containing adjustable slides that allow us to change different characteristics of our ride. The first tab is the stiffness tab, and in each tab the layout is similar. We have a series of sliders and we have an explanation as to what those sliders do. We can move those sliders by clicking in an area, or by entering a number next to the slider. So in the case of stiffness, what we're adjusting here is the minimum damping or the minimum stiffness of the vehicle's shocks, both front and rear. We adjust this based on the comfort or performance level we desire. This is our active anti-roll tab, and here we can adjust how the system responds to cornering events, how aggressively the algorithm is invoked based on that steering input, and also how we distribute that additional force, whether we distribute it to the front or to the rear. This is our active anti-pitch control. And this system tries to prevent the vehicle from pitching during braking and acceleration, similar to anti-dive or anti-squat geometry in a suspension. We're able to adjust the sensitivity of this algorithm, how aggressively it kicks in, and also the response that it gives, both in compression and in rebound. Next is the end stop tab. And the end stop function attempts to bring the wheel to a stop by the end of its travel. So for instance, in a compression event where we hit a pothole, we're trying to prevent that shock from bottoming out. We can adjust where that end stop begins to kick in the shock travel, and we can also adjust how aggressively that algorithm is invoked. We can do that for both front and rear. Our last tab is the G-Comfort tab, and G-Comfort acts as a cap on the maximum force the damper can generate, and we use this to prevent harshness. It's very similar to a high-speed damping adjustment. So let's go ahead and create a tune. The first thing I want to do is pick the mode in which I want to tune. So in this case, I'm going to tune in mode 1. First thing I want to do is read everything that's out of the controller. So I'm going to apply this to all of the tabs, and I'm going to display the setup that's in the controller. So I've now read out all the values in the controller for each one of the tabs. Then I'm going to begin my tuning. I'm going to start with stiffness first, and I'm going to adjust the stiffness of the compression and rebound for the front and the rear to my liking. Whether I'm trying to achieve a performance goal or a comfort goal here is going to depend on how much I dial in. And I'm going to continue to make those changes, and as I do, I'm going to test those changes in the temporary memory of the controller. That allows me to drive around with that change, but I don't make it permanent until I actually find the values that suit me the best. At that point in time, I can go ahead and save those changes to the controller, and they're now permanent. If I wanted to save them for just this tab, I could go ahead and save those changes just for this tab. And the reason why I might do that is perhaps I've made some changes in the other tabs and I haven't tested them out yet. So I don't want to make them permanent until I've tested them. Next, I'm going to go to my Active Anti-Roll tab, and I'm going to begin tuning there. I'm first going to attune how aggressively I want the algorithm to work based on steering angle input. So the more I tune up this roll stiffness, the more aggressive the algorithm is when I turn the steering wheel. I'm then going to go out and tune the balance of the car. I'm going to try to change the shock settings to either dial out oversteer or understeer. And I'm going to do that using the distribution bars. Once I have values that I've tested that I feel work really well, I could go ahead and, just for this tab, save those changes to permanent memory. I can move to my active pitch control, and I can begin tuning that. So sensitivity would be, think of it as the amount of angle that you see in the vehicle in both squat or in brake dive. And the more sensitive I am to that, to an angle change, the more aggressive my algorithm is going to be. And then I can adjust my front and rear compression based on the goal I'm trying to achieve. So let me say, for example, that I had squat in the rear of the car. I could go ahead and dial up more compression in the rear, or I could increase the rebound stiffness in the front. Or I could do a combination of both of those in order to take that vehicle pitch out of the car. I mean, adding additional compression can compromise traction, so maybe rebound is something you need to do based on your vehicle setup. So I would go ahead and make those changes again. I would test those changes until I found the values I liked. Then I would actually write them to the controller. Next, we're going to tune the end stop. There are two tuning parameters for end stop. One is gain, and the other one is where the end stop algorithm kicks in the stroke of the shock. And you can begin setting these based on where your physical bump stops are in the car. If you don't have bump stops in the car, you're probably going to want to move this value further away from the fully compressed value, which represents 0 in the scale. You're also going to likely want to add more gain to help control bottoming. If we want to reduce the travel of the shock, we can bring those end stops in and make them kick in sooner in the shock travel. And as you tune these values, if you're too aggressive with either one of these values, it's going to show up in your ride quality. You're going to feel that end stop kick in too early, and you may need to back it down or reduce the gain. I'm going to go ahead and test those changes. I'm going to bring the car in. When I feel like I've reached the values that work best for me, I'm going to go ahead and save those to the controller. Lastly, I'm going to tune my G-Comfort tab. G-Comfort acts as a cap on the maximum force the damper can generate to prevent harshness if we hit a bump during cornering or while the system is trying to prevent pitch. G-Comfort is much like a high-speed damping control. G-Comfort should be adjusted on a smooth surface while performing slalom-type maneuvers. This allows you to transition the car back and forth and feel the algorithm kick in. We should start with a low setting in G-Comfort and work our way up until we find a noticeable decrease in performance in either cornering or in pitch control, and then we can begin dialing it back from there. Generally, you'll bring this value up slowly, and then once you reach the threshold, you'll back off, say 2, 3, maybe 5% to prevent the algorithm kicking in when you don't want it to. So I'm going to come out to my system monitor tab. I'm going to go back into tuning. So let's see what I've actually got in the tuning tab for all of my tabs. So I'm going to apply this to all my tabs. I'm going to display the save setup. So this should show me what I have in the vehicle for my switch tune number 1. If I go to switch tune number 2, let's display for all the tabs what's in the setup. So here we go. I can see that everything's a little bit different than what I had in my tune 1. And again, I can do this for tune 1 and tune 2 and tune 3. Gee, I really like that setting. I really like how I've got this car set up. So I'm going to go ahead and save that setup. So first thing I'm going to do is display all the information. Then I'm going to go to save this setup. And when I do that, I can now save this. And just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to put the date down here. And that tells me that if I want to go back and pull that setting up, I can go ahead and do so. So that's basically how we tune. What values you arrive at are really based on your knowledge of how you want your vehicle to handle. If I'm out testing, I want to do one variable at a time, make sure I'm comfortable with that change, save that change, move on to the next tab and work on those changes. And I would work from left to right on the tabs. So lastly, let's go into the switch disabled mode, or the single tune mode. In this case, I'm going to press the switch, and it gives me a little warning here that says, hey, I'm going to disable my ride switch, and that's okay. I'm at the track today, and I want to create a specific tune for this track. So I'm going to go ahead and go in here and change these values like I did in the previous exercise for the switch tune. But this time, once I arrive at the values I want, I'm going to actually save this setup. And this is a custom tune, and I'm going to save this for the racetrack I'm at. So I'm at Lime Rock Park today, and this is my setup for Lime Rock Park. I can save that individual setup, and now if I want to revert my vehicle back, I can go in and load the setup that I saved previously. So now I can go ahead and reload my switched enabled setup. I'm going to apply it to all tabs, and I'm going to save those changes to the controller. That setup is back in the vehicle, and the custom setup I had is taken out. So I've opened up the directory where I keep all my tune files, and I'm going to open up that setup we just saved. You can see that each one of the values that was in the tuning tool are all listed here. So I can actually come down here and I can begin to enter notes about this. Changed on the 20th. Made adjustments. So I can use these notes to write all kinds of different stuff. I mean, I might want to talk about what the weather was that day. I could talk about what my tire temperatures were, how many heat cycles I had in my tires, what spring rates I had associated with this tune. So that might help me later on when I was going back to that same venue. For instance, if it was an autocross, I could reload this tune and start my tuning from there for that particular day. Now that you know the software, find a safe spot, get out there, and do some tuning.